After weeks of diligent saving and countless trips to various appliance stores, Maxwell Stone finally brought home his brand new refrigerator, a state-of-the-art machine that promised efficiency, sleek design, and all the modern comforts he had long dreamed about. The day was filled with excitement as he unboxed the appliance in his driveway, imagining the cool, crisp air that would soon preserve his groceries and elevate his kitchen style. Maxwell's joy was palpable, every detail, from the polished stainless steel finish to the whisper-quiet operation, affirmed that his hard work had paid off. That night, after an evening of celebrating his new purchase with a modest meal and a satisfied smile, Maxwell's peaceful rest was abruptly shattered by a loud, jarring noise. He awoke in a startled haze, heart pounding as he tried to recall the source of the commotion. The sound was unfamiliar and intrusive, a stark contrast to the earlier sense of accomplishment. Rubbing sleep from his eyes, he wondered if perhaps an unexpected malfunction or a nearby disturbance was responsible. As Maxwell climbed out of bed and peered out his window, he caught a glimpse of flashing lights in the distance. The serenity of the night had been transformed into a scene of suspense and uncertainty. His new refrigerator, which had symbolized months of careful planning and hope, now felt like an ironic centerpiece in an unfolding mystery. The sound had come too suddenly and too loudly, and he braced himself for the possibility that something was amiss. Though he was still groggy, Maxwell's mind began to churn with questions. Had someone tampered with his purchase? Was it merely a mechanical glitch, or was there a more sinister explanation behind the unexpected clamor? His thoughts raced as he considered every possibility, but the clear, deliberate nature of the noise suggested that it was not a random occurrence, it had purpose. Determined to get to the bottom of the disturbance, Maxwell resolved to investigate further once the immediate shock subsided. He decided to stay alert and cautiously monitor the situation, all the while marveling at how quickly the thrill of a new appliance could be overshadowed by unforeseen complications. As he lay back on his bed, his mind oscillated between frustration, curiosity, and a tinge of anxiety. The refrigerator, now a symbol of his recent triumph, was entwined with the mystery of that piercing alarm, a mystery that promised to upend his newfound moment of domestic bliss. In that intense, unsettling hour, Maxwell knew that the next steps would shape the unfolding events of the night. Would he discover that a simple accident had caused the disturbance, or was there something more deliberate at play? One thing was certain, his life, once filled with the simple pleasure of a perfect new fridge, was about to take an unexpected turn. The following morning, still reeling from the disruptive alarm, Maxwell Stone stepped outside in search of answers. His breath formed small clouds in the crisp morning air as he made his way from his front door to the driveway. There, much to his astonishment, his prized new refrigerator was not where he had left it inside but was instead sitting on the driveway. It was being gently maneuvered by none other than Roxanne Price, a notorious neighborhood busybody known for her intrusive behavior and, as gossip had it, for making off-color remarks. Maxwell's shock was complete. How could it be that his carefully purchased appliance was being moved, almost liberated, by Roxanne in broad daylight? He hurried over, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and confusion. Roxanne, dressed in her typically flamboyant ensemble and with a haughty air, met him with an unapologetic smile. When confronted, she immediately denied any wrongdoing. "It wasn't stolen, Maxwell," she insisted in a tone that bordered on smug. "I found it abandoned out here, so I was simply putting it in a safer spot." Her words struck Maxwell as absurd. Abandoned? How could such a valuable, just-delivered refrigerator simply be abandoned? He recalled every detail of the delivery, the excitement, the careful placement on his driveway, and now this inexplicable rearrangement. Roxanne's explanation did nothing to quell the rising storm of suspicion. Instead, the more she insisted it was harmless and unintentional, the more Maxwell began to suspect that she had taken matters into her own hands for reasons that remained unclear. At that moment, Maxwell's mind raced with questions. Had Roxanne been planning this all along? Was there some hidden motive behind her taking charge of his new appliance? The incident, trivial on the surface, was now drenched in layers of mystery and personal affront. The busybody's notorious reputation for stirring trouble in the neighborhood only deepened Maxwell's disquiet. He recalled past incidents where Roxanne's meddling had led to minor chaos, and sometimes worse. Feeling both incensed and determined to reclaim what was rightfully his, Maxwell decided that he would not let this issue fester without a proper confrontation. The mysterious relocation of his refrigerator was not simply about a misplaced appliance, it was a stark intrusion into his personal domain. With resolve hardening inside him, he resolved to gather his thoughts and consider his next moves carefully. Maxwell knew that a direct conversation with Roxanne was inevitable, but for now, he needed to process the significance of what had happened. As he stood there in the cool light of dawn, Maxwell's emotions swung between indignation and a pragmatic calm. The sight of his once secure appliance now sitting as an odd spectacle on his driveway was a vivid reminder that even the smallest interference in one's personal space could signal much larger issues at play. And so, with his appetite for a normal day suddenly replaced by a burning need for clarity and retribution, Maxwell prepared to take the next step in this unfolding neighborhood drama. Not long after the confusing discovery of his new refrigerator on the driveway, chaos erupted. While Maxwell was still coming to grips with the mystery of its relocation, Roxanne Price's behavior escalated dramatically. In a sudden, unexpected outburst, Roxanne began screaming that Maxwell was attacking her, an accusation that was as unprovoked as it was bizarre. With her face contorted in exaggerated fear and indignation, she urgently dialed 911. Maxwell, stunned by Roxanne's theatrical reaction, stood frozen for a few heartbeats as her shrill voice filled the air. According to her, the situation was dire and Maxwell was the aggressor in a wild, fabricated scenario. The intensity of her claims made it seem as if an altercation had just taken place. Yet, in reality, Maxwell had done nothing more than try to understand why his refrigerator was mysteriously relocated by Roxanne. The absurdity of the accusation was only compounded by the fact that Roxanne continued to wail about being attacked even as she gestured wildly with her hands, as if trying to physically ward off a non-existent assailant. Meanwhile, Maxwell wrestled with the idea of calling 911 himself to set the record straight. However, he decided to wait for the authorities to arrive, confident that the forthcoming investigation would reveal the truth behind the farcical scenario. From Maxwell's perspective, the situation had shifted from a personal property dispute to an all-out dramatic confrontation. Roxanne's false claim not only threatened his reputation but also risked drawing law enforcement into an unnecessary melee. It was a bold, reckless exaggeration of events that, in Maxwell's mind, could only be an attempt to cover her own misdeeds. Despite the rising tension, Maxwell maintained his composure. He understood that emotions were running high, and that sometimes, provocative behavior could be a diversion from more calculated mischief. As the minutes ticked by, the neighborhood grew increasingly aware of the unfolding drama. Some residents peeked out of their windows, while others checked their phones for updates on the situation. The incident quickly spread through our local social media channels and messaging groups, adding fuel to the fire of public intrigue and gossip. Maxwell stood silently, his expression a mixture of incredulity and measured resolve. He knew that the truth was on his side. After all, he had every receipt and proof of purchase to demonstrate that the refrigerator was legally his. Yet, Roxanne's wild accusations threatened to distort the narrative and potentially embroil him in a messy police investigation. In that tense, surreal moment, it became clear that Roxanne's behavior was more than just an overreaction. Her accusations were a deliberate distortion, designed to shift blame and create a diversion from her own questionable actions. Maxwell realized that he needed to remain vigilant and patient, trusting that the clarity of the evidence would eventually prevail over Roxanne's boisterous claims. By mid-morning, the situation had escalated beyond mere digital gossip or theatrical false alarms. Maxwell Stone, now steeled by both indignation and determination, decided it was time to confront Roxanne Price face-to-face and set the record straight. Summoning all his composure, he marched up to the driveway where his recently liberated refrigerator stood as the symbol of his ordeal. "Roxanne!" Maxwell called out in a firm yet controlled voice, grabbing the attention of several curious neighbors who had gathered around. Roxanne, who had been inspecting the refrigerator with a disingenuous air of casual curiosity, spun around with a look that mixed surprise and feigned innocence. "I did nothing wrong, Maxwell. I just found this appliance abandoned and I was moving it to a safe place," she insisted, her tone laced with a patronizing smile that did nothing to hide a trace of mischief. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "Abandoned?" he repeated, incredulous, as he stepped closer. "Do you have any idea how much I've worked and saved to purchase this fridge? It wasn't abandoned, it was delivered to my property, and you moved it without my permission." His words cut through the air with the weight of genuine frustration and a sense of betrayal. The confrontation quickly attracted an impromptu audience. Neighbors, drawn by the unfolding drama, began whispering among themselves, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. In that charged atmosphere, Maxwell maintained his focus on Roxanne. He unfolded the receipt he had tucked away in his wallet, a tangible, irrefutable piece of evidence proving ownership. "This, Roxanne, is proof that the fridge belongs to me. I purchased it with every hard-earned dollar I saved." Roxanne's eyes darted towards the receipt, but her confidence wavered ever so slightly. Instead of conceding, she launched into a flurry of excuses, half-heartedly attempting to claim that the appliance was, in fact, abandoned, or perhaps even that someone else had left it behind. "I mean, it could have been a mistake on the part of the delivery service, don't you think?" she suggested weakly. Her words, however, rang hollow in the face of Maxwell's calm yet assertive demeanor. "I don't want your excuses," Maxwell retorted, his voice rising as he demanded accountability. "What I want is for you to acknowledge that you've crossed a boundary, a serious invasion of my privacy and property. I trusted you as a neighbor, Roxanne, and your actions have shown a complete disregard for my rights." The tension in the air grew thicker as Maxwell continued, his tone shifting from firm to resolute. "If you have any decency left, you'll return my refrigerator immediately and apologize for this intrusion." His words, both a challenge and a demand for respect, left the small crowd murmuring in agreement. Yet, Roxanne was not yet ready to yield. With a huff, she tried to deflect by accusing Maxwell of overreacting and even insinuated that perhaps he was trying to hide something by being so protective of his new appliance. Such wild insinuations only served to escalate the conflict further. Maxwell, however, remained focused on the facts, his grip on the receipt tightening as he reiterated his point that no one had the right to help themselves to another's property. After several minutes of heated exchange, each word measured and laced with underlying tensions from past neighborhood disputes, it became painfully clear that the confrontation was about more than just a refrigerator, it was a battle for dignity and respect in the community. Maxwell's steadfast commitment to reclaiming his property was now a stand against all forms of entitlement and disregard. By the time Roxanne's defiant chatter began to falter in the face of the concrete evidence and the growing consensus among the onlookers, Maxwell had made his intentions unmistakably clear. His demand was simple: restore what is rightfully his and acknowledge the error of your ways. The dramatic showdown, with its blend of quiet determination and public scrutiny, set the stage for what would become a defining moment in neighborhood relations, a moment when personal boundaries were reasserted, and the truth emerged victorious over reckless opportunism. Even after the heated confrontation in the driveway, Roxanne Price refused to back down. With her pride wounded and her fabricated story under increasing pressure, she suddenly shifted tactics. Instead of apologizing for moving Maxwell's refrigerator, she began to escalate the situation further, this time by threatening to involve the authorities. "You leave me no choice, Maxwell," Roxanne shrieked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and feigned fear. "I'm calling 911, and I'm telling everyone that you attacked me and tried to steal my things." Her outburst was dramatic, designed to turn the tables and portray herself as a victim of Maxwell's supposed aggression. Maxwell's heart pounded at the audacity of her claims. He knew that he had done nothing more than assert his rightful ownership, yet Roxanne's hyperbolic reaction was intended to shift public perception. For a long, agonizing moment, he considered calling 911 himself to set the record straight, but after a brief reflection, he decided that waiting for the police to arrive and hear his side of the story might provide a more solid defense. As neighbors began to murmur and smartphones flashed with live updates from the incident, Roxanne's performance took on an almost theatrical quality. She gesticulated wildly, her arms flailing as she recounted her version of events. Every word was dripping with exaggeration, painting Maxwell as a violent intruder rather than the aggrieved homeowner he truly was. Her voice reached a fever pitch as she threatened that if Maxwell did not comply with her demands, though she never clearly stated what those demands were, she would ensure that the authorities made an example of him. The tension in the air was palpable. Some neighbors, already growing tired of Roxanne's previous antics, began to exchange skeptical glances. Others, who had witnessed the confrontation, started questioning the legitimacy of her claims. Maxwell, meanwhile, maintained his calm. He quietly resolved that his approach was to let the truth speak for itself. He had every document, every piece of evidence needed to prove that the refrigerator was his and that her actions were nothing short of an infringement upon his property rights. Roxanne's rhetoric, as wild as it was, ultimately couldn't withstand scrutiny for long. Even in her hysteria, small details in her story didn't add up. She contradicted herself multiple times, and her tone betrayed a rehearsed performance rather than genuine fear. Maxwell, seizing the opportunity, calmly informed her that he would not hesitate to call the police if she continued to defame him. "You can call all the 911 lines you want, Roxanne," he said firmly, "but I have nothing to hide and I have proof that this refrigerator is mine." Her face twisted in indignation as she launched into further invective, threatening that the police would find her version of events more credible than his cold, hard receipts. Despite her bluster, the rational voices among the onlookers grew louder. By the time Roxanne finally dialed 911, her performance had reached its zenith. She was crying, wildly waving her arms, and making outlandish claims that Maxwell had launched a physical attack on her. Maxwell, standing resolute amid the chaos, felt a bitter mix of anger and sorrow. Here was a neighbor whose actions, driven by either a desperate need for attention or deep-seated malice, had spiraled so far as to falsely accuse him of violence. He watched as Roxanne's call to the authorities cut through the murmurs of the crowd. A call that, despite its dramatic flair, was destined to be disproven by the evidence he possessed. In that charged moment, with the threat of legal action hanging in the balance, Maxwell steeled himself for what was to come. He knew that when the police arrived, he would have to remain calm and present all the facts clearly. The confrontation had now reached a point where pride, property, and the truth were on the line, and Maxwell was determined not to let Roxanne's falsehoods ruin everything he had worked so hard to build. It wasn't long after Roxanne's explosive threat that the inevitable happened. Her frantic 911 call went out into the night. In a moment that would be replayed in whispers for days to come, Roxanne's voice, high-pitched and tremulous, rang out over the emergency line. She claimed that Maxwell had not only stolen her possessions but had physically attacked her, a statement so wildly exaggerated that it sent shockwaves of disbelief through those who had already witnessed the earlier confrontation. From his position at the edge of the commotion, Maxwell listened as the phone call unfolded. Every word of Roxanne's account was laced with raw emotion and an unmistakable attempt at garnering sympathy. But Maxwell, with a quiet confidence born of years spent in high-stakes situations, knew that her words did not match the facts. The evidence was on his side, every receipt, every documented conversation, every silent witness to the real events. As Roxanne's 911 call reverberated through the neighborhood, the scene quickly grew chaotic. Neighbors rushed to their windows, smartphones in hand, recording snippets of the drama as it unfolded. Some expressed shock, while others, having grown accustomed to Roxanne's tendency for hyperbole, shook their heads in disbelief. In the midst of this uproar, Maxwell maintained a careful vigil, knowing that the arrival of the police would finally put a stop to the false narrative. The dispatcher's voice, calm and methodical, eventually broke through the din of Roxanne's panicked accusations. Questions were asked, details requested, and it soon became apparent that her story was rapidly unraveling. The dispatcher noted the inconsistencies and, although sympathetic to her distress, reassured her that officers were on their way. Meanwhile, Maxwell decided not to intervene directly but to continue gathering a mental record of every moment. Within minutes, the sound of sirens grew near, and soon a patrol car pulled up on the block. The approaching officers brought with them an air of authority and resolution. Maxwell stepped forward, ready to calmly explain the sequence of events and present his proof of purchase. As the officers began to question Roxanne, her previously vivid claims started to falter. Under the steady gaze of the authorities, her narrative became a jumble of half-remembered details and overt exaggerations. Maxwell provided the officers with clear documentation that the refrigerator was his, every receipt, every delivery confirmation, laid out in an unassailable display of truth. The investigation at that moment shifted focus from the abstract to the concrete, as the officers methodically verified every piece of evidence. They inspected Maxwell's home and his driveway, taking notes and even snapping a few photos to corroborate his story. Throughout the process, Roxanne remained a bundle of conflicting emotions, oscillating between uncontrollable hysteria and glaring defiance. Her face, illuminated intermittently by the flashing blue and red lights of the police vehicles, betrayed a growing awareness that her story was collapsing under the weight of hard facts. The dispatcher's earlier skepticism now took shape in the officers' measured questions and careful cross-checks. As the situation gradually came under control, it was evident that Roxanne's 911 call was nothing more than an attempt to manipulate the narrative. The evidence Maxwell had provided was overwhelming, and as the officers continued their investigation, the truth emerged with undeniable clarity. The immediate fallout from the call not only vindicated Maxwell's actions but also marked the beginning of a more formal inquiry into Roxanne's repeated misdeeds. In that long, tension-filled stretch of time, Maxwell felt a mixture of relief and deep regret. While he was reassured by the prompt response of law enforcement and the steady dispelling of the false allegations, he was also pained by the knowledge that his once quiet neighborhood was now riven with mistrust and sensationalism, all sparked by Roxanne's desperate outburst. Nonetheless, he knew that justice would ultimately prevail, and that the truth, backed by unwavering evidence, would restore the balance in his life and community. Before long, local law enforcement took decisive action. Within minutes of Roxanne's 911 call, a patrol car rolled up, and Officer Clarence Chief Johnson, renowned for his fairness and his long-standing rapport with community members, stepped onto the scene. With the reverberations of Roxanne's impassioned accusations still echoing in the air, Chief Johnson quickly assumed command of the situation with his calm, measured authority. Chief Johnson began by speaking directly with both Roxanne and Maxwell. His initial demeanor was one of professional skepticism as he carefully listened to Roxanne's exaggerated account of events. "Ma'am," he said in his steady tone, "please take a moment to calmly tell me what happened." Roxanne, still shaking with pent-up fear and defiance, launched into a rapid tale of alleged assault and treachery, alleging that Maxwell had not only taken her possessions but had physically attacked her in cold blood. Her narrative, however, was inconsistent, replete with dramatic flourishes that appeared to be more theatrical than factual. Maxwell, standing a few paces away with the supporting documentation clutched in his hand, waited patiently. When it was his turn to speak, he explained the entire incident clearly and succinctly. He recounted how, after weeks of saving for the fridge and the joy of unboxing it, he had been rudely disturbed by a loud noise in the middle of the night. He then described how he later discovered his newly delivered refrigerator on his driveway, moved by Roxanne Price without his consent. Maxwell produced receipts and delivery confirmations as concrete evidence of his purchase and rightful ownership. Chief Johnson listened to both sides with careful scrutiny. He surveyed the scene, examining the precise location where the appliance had been found, checking Maxwell's driveway, and even requesting Roxanne to recount key details again. With every question, it became increasingly apparent that Maxwell's account was detailed, measured, and corroborated by tangible evidence, whereas Roxanne's story wavered, full of discrepancies and emotional exaggerations. Throughout the investigation, Chief Johnson remained impartial yet firm. He requested that Roxanne explain her reasoning for moving the refrigerator, and while she hesitated, her answers grew more inconsistent with each query. Simultaneously, the officer carefully reviewed the documentation Maxwell provided, verifying his purchase with a level of precision that only decades of law enforcement experience can bring. His investigative approach was methodical, ensuring that every detail was recorded and every contradiction noted. Neighbors who had gathered nearby observed the unfolding inquiry with mixed emotions. Many expressed quiet support for Maxwell, relieved that an impartial authority was now untangling the web of confusion. Others were simply curious, watching as the truth began to emerge amidst the chaos created by Roxanne's fervor. Chief Johnson then assured Maxwell that the preliminary investigation indicated no wrongdoing on his part. The documentation was in order, and the physical evidence confirmed his version of events. By the time Chief Johnson concluded his questioning, the already tense atmosphere began to settle. His calm, authoritative presence had not only calmed the situation but had also begun to restore faith among the residents that justice, based on fact rather than emotion, would prevail. The investigation was set to continue, but the initial findings were already tipping in favor of Maxwell, thereby casting serious doubt on Roxanne's narrative. In that charged moment, as Chief Johnson meticulously filed his report and reassured the gathered neighbors, it became clear that the truth was emerging, grounded in solid evidence and the professional integrity of those sworn to uphold it. The incident, as dramatic as it had been, was now transitioning into a more official inquiry that promised to untangle the tangle of lies, fear, and misunderstanding that had so captivated our community. With the investigation well underway, Chief Johnson and his team turned their focus to gathering further evidence from Roxanne Price's residence. A search of her property revealed a trove of incriminating items, a collection of fraudulent insurance documents, a carefully hidden stolen locket, and numerous records that indicated a pattern of deceit and theft. The discovery of these items painted a stark picture. Roxanne was not merely a meddlesome busybody but a habitual liar and thief with a history of scams and shoplifting. When the police confronted Roxanne with their findings, the facade she had maintained for so long began to crumble. In a tense exchange, officers laid out the evidence in a clear, measured manner, forcing Roxanne to acknowledge inconsistencies in her story. Despite her initial attempt to cling to her fabricated narrative, it became increasingly evident that the weight of hard evidence was too great to dismiss. Neighbors, having heard whispers of the investigation's progress, began to murmur among themselves in disbelief as Roxanne's lies were systematically dismantled by the probing questions of the officers. The once loud and defiant Roxanne now appeared small and contrite, a stark contrast to the booming persona that had incited so much turmoil just hours before. Chief Johnson's calm and methodical approach left no room for further theatrics. When pressed for an explanation, Roxanne could only offer vague, contradictory answers, her credibility evaporating under the scrutiny of incontrovertible proof. In that moment, the community realized that her earlier claims of victimization were nothing more than a desperate ploy for attention and control. As the evidence was formally documented and her file grew thicker with charges of theft and fraud, Roxanne's reputation in the neighborhood suffered a severe blow. The police's unyielding investigation, combined with the public display of the incriminating artifacts, sent a powerful message: there would be no impunity for those who exploited others and subverted the truth. This dramatic unraveling of Roxanne's carefully constructed lies resonated deeply with the community. Many saw it as a vindication for Maxwell Stone, whose calm insistence on the facts had never wavered. The confrontation with evidence was a turning point, affirming that truth and transparency would prevail over personal vendettas and falsehoods. In the wake of the mounting evidence, the police moved swiftly to bring Roxanne Price to justice. With an already robust case against her, including proof of theft, fraudulent insurance records, and additional items that linked her to a series of misdeeds. The officers arrested Roxanne for theft and related offenses. The arrest, carried out without unnecessary confrontation, was a decisive blow to her long history of misconduct. As Roxanne was taken into custody, Maxwell Stone stood by, experiencing a complex mix of relief and lingering anger. The sight of the once brazen, meddling neighbor being led away in handcuffs was both cathartic and a somber reminder of how far the situation had escalated. For Maxwell, it was not about celebrating punishment but about restoring the sanctity of his personal property and his peace of mind. The arrest quickly became the catalyst for a wider investigation. Law enforcement officials, buoyed by the compelling evidence already gathered, began to look into Roxanne's other alleged crimes. Reports of scams, repeated shoplifting, and a string of similar incidents in neighboring communities emerged, suggesting that Roxanne's criminal activities were not isolated. The case soon developed into a larger probe into her pattern of deceit and fraud, with investigators determined to uncover the full extent of her exploitation across the region. The news of the arrest and the subsequent investigation spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Conversations shifted from whispered gossip to serious discussions about the need for stronger community oversight and the importance of holding wrongdoers accountable. Residents expressed relief that the truth had come to light and that the integrity of our shared spaces was being defended by law enforcement. For Maxwell, the entire ordeal underscored a critical lesson, that vigilance in defending one's property and rights is paramount, even when faced with unexpected betrayal from those who live so close by. As the investigation unfolded, many neighbors came forward with their own stories, further bolstering the case against Roxanne and highlighting systemic issues within our community. The arrest marked a turning point, not only for Maxwell but for the broader community as well. It signaled that behavior that disrupts the peace and exploits the trust of neighbors would not be tolerated. With Roxanne in custody and a larger criminal investigation now in progress, our community began taking its first steps back toward calm and order, confident that justice was being served. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, and it wasn't long before Roxanne Price's fate was sealed in a courtroom. The case, bolstered by a mountain of concrete evidence, from fraudulent insurance documents and the stolen locket to the unassailable proof of her repeated misdeeds, left little doubt about her guilt. In a decisive verdict, the court found Roxanne guilty of theft, insurance fraud, and hate crimes. The sentence was severe, and she was ordered to serve a lengthy prison term. For Maxwell Stone and the rest of our community, the verdict was met with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. The decision in court provided not only a sense of justice for Maxwell, who had endured the chaos and intrusions, but also a powerful statement that no one was above the law. The ruling helped restore faith in our community's commitment to fairness and accountability, a belief that had been shaken by the tumultuous events of the past days. News of the verdict spread rapidly through neighborhood channels and social media, where many residents expressed support for the outcome. The overwhelming consensus was that Roxanne's long history of deception and boundary violations had finally been exposed and punished. In the wake of the trial, several community meetings were held, during which neighbors shared their own experiences and voiced a collective desire for a more transparent and respectful environment. For Maxwell, the courtroom triumph was bittersweet. While it validated his fight for his rights and reasserted his control over his property, it also served as a stark reminder of how quickly personal disputes can escalate into matters of public concern. However, the verdict ultimately became a turning point, a catalyst for healing. With Roxanne removed from the community and her criminal behavior no longer allowed to fester unchecked, a sense of normalcy gradually returned. The entire ordeal galvanized the community into re-examining its standards and mechanisms for conflict resolution. New guidelines were proposed to ensure that disputes were handled with fairness and transparency. Neighbors, who had previously been hesitant to speak up for fear of retribution, now felt emboldened by the knowledge that justice could prevail. Ultimately, the court's decision allowed the neighborhood to begin a slow process of healing. The shared experience, though deeply unsettling at times, had brought the community closer together. Residents learned that standing up against injustice, even in the face of personal adversity, was essential for maintaining the integrity of our public spaces and our collective well-being. In the quiet aftermath of the tumult, as the courtroom's echoes faded into memory, Maxwell Stone found himself reflecting deeply on the lessons of the ordeal. The saga of his prized new refrigerator, marred by betrayal, false accusations, and public spectacle, had transformed into something far greater than a simple property dispute. It had become a symbol of resilience and a testament to the enduring power of truth and justice. Sitting in the calm of his now restored home, Maxwell recalled each twist of the story, the joy of finally acquiring the modern appliance after long months of saving, the shock of discovering it mysteriously moved by Roxanne Price, and the dizzying cascade of events that followed. Though every moment had been fraught with tension and uncertainty, the final outcome revealed an important truth, that standing up for one's rights can lead to meaningful change in the face of adversity. Maxwell's reflections were tinged with both relief and a sober understanding of the complexities of human nature. He marveled at how the relentless determination to protect one's property had ultimately led not only to personal vindication but also to a broader awakening among his neighbors. The neighborhood, which had once been divided by sensational rumors and unchecked gossip, slowly began to heal as residents embraced transparency and fairness. The refrigerator, a modern marvel that had sparked so many disputes, had now become an unlikely emblem of hope. Its sleek lines and cool efficiency served as a daily reminder that even when circumstances seem dire, the truth will eventually prevail. For Maxwell, it symbolized the rewards of perseverance. The idea that with steadfast courage and a commitment to justice, one could overcome even the most insidious of challenges. In his quiet moments, Maxwell often found himself thinking about the broader implications of his ordeal. It wasn't merely about reclaiming a stolen appliance, it was about standing up against injustice wherever it might arise. He came to understand that every individual has the right to a safe and respected personal space, and that when someone violates that space, the ripple effects can touch the entire community. Maxwell's journey had taught him a valuable lesson, that integrity and resilience are not simply abstract ideals but practical tools that empower us to face life's unexpected challenges. As he looked around at the familiar comforts of his home, a place where peace had been painstakingly restored, he felt a renewed commitment to advocate for fairness and truth. With every glance at his pristine refrigerator, Maxwell was reminded of the long road he had traveled, the battles fought, and the victories won. And more than that, he knew that the experience had fundamentally changed his community for the better, a community now bound by a shared understanding that respect, accountability, and the courage to speak out are the cornerstones of a just society.